Welcome to the MSDW Podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and on this episode, we talked to Josh Greenbaum of Enterprise Application Consulting. Josh was a journalist before he became one of the elite industry analysts in this space, and he was on hand at Microsoft's recent Business Applications Summit as part of an analyst briefing that coincided with the event. Josh is monitoring a much broader swath of the enterprise technology market than we are at MSDW, so for me, this conversation was a great chance to get new perspective on where some of the technology cycles and trends are at more broadly in areas including ERP, citizen development, integration, and automation. Josh also shares some perspective on where he sees Microsoft's progress compared to its cloud competitors. All right, Josh Greenbaum, welcome to the podcast. Welcome back to the podcast.
Great. Thanks, Jason. It's great to be here.
So I thought it would be nice to kind of catch up. You always have great perspective on what's going on in the enterprise software space, both with Microsoft, which our listeners and readers are obviously always paying very close attention to, and a little more broadly. One thing that you told me was that you found some of the latest sort of Microsoft guidance on where they're at with Dynamics 365 finance and operations interesting, in particular some of their progress on customer growth. So I thought maybe we could just start there and get a little more of your impression on what you take away from some of those latest figures, things that I published and that Microsoft's sort of been letting partners know about as well.
Right. No, and I think I think the backdrop to this is that they've been rather parsimonious in handing out any real numbers. Those of us in the business of imparting, trying to impart wisdom to customers and other interested parties have found that a little frustrating. So it was nice to see some daylight on some of the work they're able to do and the progress they're making. And frankly, I was pleasantly surprised. They seem to have, finance operations seem to have some really solid momentum. The number of actual live customers, the number in production is very impressive, considering it's only a couple of years really in the market. These are good numbers, 600 plus in production across multiple geographies. What's an interesting little detail that came out in your story was that the 12 to 18 month implementation timeline. Now, some people will look at that as a negative. Oh my God, we should be doing this stuff in 6 weeks, which is this sort of mythical 6 week implementation time. What that time frame tells me is that in the mix are some rather interesting and complex projects. This isn't just let's flip the switch on some generic finance and operations things, and we're gonna go from QuickBooks to finance and operations. That's not what those numbers indicate. That indicates serious workloads, important processes are being moved to this new platform, and that's good. That tells me something about how strong the effort is in actually convincing customers that there's a lot of value and it's worth taking the risk to do these complex implementations because you're going to get a lot out of it.
It would be fascinating to know more about what the scale of some of those customers have been over time in terms of have the ones launching. They were the first one. I assume the first ones to launch often took on very limited, much smaller sort of scenarios or divisions or projects that could be done more quickly. It'd be very interesting to know, and that was my perception of it too, in terms of case studies that came out and reference customers that were put out there. It would be really interesting to know how that's been changing. Have the go lives more recently become more complex? Are the ones in the pipeline more complex than the ones that have already gone live? Because I think that's where the product's headed. And I think they certainly need, would you say they need more time to actually launch, get some of those more complex projects over the finish line, so to speak?
Well, definitely. I mean, that by very nature of it, we're going to see we'll see maybe a slight lowering of the curve in terms of the go lives, because they're going to be more complex projects. And that they by necessity take time. The interesting thing to juxtapose to that complexity, which is meant to be good, is the number of new logos versus existing customers. And that, again, according to the information you published, it was 2/3 of the current customers working with finance and operations are net new. Now that again is sort of there's some important nuance that'd be nice to drive into that question is, okay, so are often the net new logos are these sort of, to really be unfair to QuickBooks remediation projects. They're the simple ones. They're the newbies that are just getting started. And oh my God, this is a great moment. We'll go to the cloud with this very strong product. It is important for all of these transitioning vendors, and this is where Microsoft, actually and SAP, live in a very similar world. It's very important for them to move the existing customer base, the on-premise base, into the cloud. That's a huge strategic initiative. And so, that's the other thing I want to see is as these numbers start to increase, how many customers are sort of moving from the older AX into this new world. Again, those are more complex projects. There's a big data migration requirement up front right away. You got to get all that data. Well, how much of the data do you move? And then there's process. There's a lot of processes that need to be re-engineered or rethought. So these are also more complex projects. So I think that's another nuance I'd love to see some more data on. Let me add something though important about your article. I'm going to praise you, again, but I think it was a great article and it really shed some important light on this sort of obscure corner, if you will, of the enterprise software market. I brought this issue up in front of a number of the executives during the analyst briefings at the recent event, and what was fascinating is, of course, the mandate to keep the lid on comes from all the way at the top, from Satya and finance in particular. Inside the Dynamics leadership, there's a number of people who came up to me afterwards and said, "Yeah, thank you for bringing that up to our leaders. Thank you for surfacing that in front of the analyst community," because I made a big deal out of those numbers, because they would like that flexibility too. They're also suffering from a lack of information and that they can go public with and really share their success. And indeed, if you've got some good news, why not share it? That's sort of my view of it. But it helps those of us who are in the marketplace of ideas. It helps us to have these comparatives because it's important to know for your readers and listeners and my clients, is there real momentum? Are other companies buying into this vision, or is it just a bunch of market slides and some cool ideas and slogans? And again, these data did show the former, that there actually is some real market momentum behind finance and operations.
Oh, and that's interesting to hear that feedback. And just to give a little more context, if you haven't read the article, anyone listening, is that this was delivered to a room full of partners at the Inspire event. All I had was audio, so I couldn't actually see. I imagine it was a big group. I mean, I imagine anyone there who had an interest in D365 finance operations was at that session at that time when Muhammad Alam was presenting it, and it was. I listened to the audio of it, and it was published publicly, and it was a very even. I would say it's kind of a very even-handed. It wasn't overly praising. I think that's not really his style, from what I know of him. Just listening to his presentations, really, it was an even-handed delivery of the progress. Presumably, he considered it good news because he gave those numbers up to presumably hundreds of people watching and listening. But he tempered it. He tempered it with challenges that they still face to make sure that the service overall stays successful. But yeah, I mean, certainly. He saw it as important enough, and he even alluded to the fact that he had to twist arms to kind of get that small amount of sort of that small amount of data revealed. So hopefully partners took away from it the positives as well. I mean, I haven't gotten a lot of feedback from partners about what they thought, but that's my take too. That it was good news that he was trying to share with them to encourage them, because I know they're under a lot of pressure to make the product successful and to find ways to invest in. Not just selling it, but like you said, getting all those AX 2009, 2012 customers to believe in it enough to move to it.
Yeah. And this is an important, inflection point in the market at large, which is really, really key. First of all, I mean, cloud momentum is huge. We all know that these numbers are this growth is happening across the board, but it's a moment in time when, finance and operations is now looking at some serious competition and really needs to kind of nail it, nail their competitive position, nail their validity in the market against a NetSuite who's never going away no matter what you want. They're there. They now have a new owner, but they're still a very, very strong market force. Obviously, SAP is really trying to maintain a strong mid-market focus. There's a lot of interest among SAP customers with large global operations in looking at other products than SAP for their subsidiary, their spoken hub kind of functions. There's a lot of interest in these other pieces of the pie, and to have Dynamics be able to actually stand up and make some solid statements about market momentum is really important for them, because otherwise there's a lot of defaults. A lot of companies that are Oracle at headquarters are going to go for the Oracle solution. Same thing with SAP. To shake them loose from that default mode, you got to have something to say. And so, what Mohammed was able to articulate to the partners, I'm sure resonated very strongly. And obviously, through a little glitch, it ended up in your article. And I think that's all goodness, frankly.
One other kind of note I'd like to get from you, just in terms of comparison. You mentioned sort of the pressure to make ERP projects faster and faster. You said 6 weeks, maybe that was tongue in cheek, but is there a lot of pressure? Is that one of the factors that like Microsoft and other vendors in the space are really pushing for to get it from 12 to 18 months down to something much smaller?
Well, the faster the better, as long as it's done well, obviously. But what's really changed, obviously, with the cloud is that and this is again for the companies like Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, Infor, who are all moving from an on-premise to a cloud model. They're really having this huge economic shift in how they book revenue, quite literally, because in the old days, it was a perpetual license. You got all the money up front. You booked the revenue. You went on your merry way. The partner either got it right or didn't get it right, and you sort of went on to the next sale. Now in the cloud, the imperative really is to get these implementations right, to get them done quickly, because your next milestone is the renewal. That renewals and could be in two years down the road. Things better be doing really well from the get-go, moving forward, because you want that renewal not just to be, hey, we're gonna sign up for the same stuff we signed up for last time, but actually we'd like to expand. We'd like to buy more licenses. We want to get more spend. And in fact, this is again something that Mohammed had mentioned, you noted in your article, that there was this notion that these customers are actually increasing spend as they roll through these projects. That is literally the absolute number one metric for the cloud now is how do you get the customer to renew and to renew at a higher level. So this is a very different world, and you got to get these implementations right. You can't have the customers slogging through an 18-month implementation and then going, well, geez, we went live, but boy, that was a resounding thud, not a fanfare. So there's a real change in how this gets done.
One of the things that Microsoft was showing off, and I would say sort of pervasively throughout that business application summit that you were at, and that you sort of had some separate meetings and briefings at, but sort of to the rest of the attendees, one of the things that was really all over the place was the idea of kind of taking apps through for Microsoft's case, it's Power Apps, and building new apps either in a low-code environment or maybe even more complex ones, and kind of either embedding them into products like Finance and Operations, which they did a demo of, or embedding apps within other apps and apps within teams within. I mean, it got very complex at times, but they're really pushing that idea that you can take the standard business solutions and you can do much more with them if you build something else. In addition, supplement it sort of with exactly what you need on the edges. Obviously that's a big part of Microsoft's larger cloud model. Can you give a little perspective? I mean, do you believe in that approach strategically for Microsoft, and do you believe in it for customers as really a key part of what customers should be paying attention to?
Absolutely. This is this is one of the more fascinating corners of the cloud market today. Is this extensibility drive again among all the vendors? And it's driven by a very important fact, which is that in the cloud you can't do customizations the way you used to. It breaks the cloud model. You can't run multi-tenant clouds if everyone's customizing. So you need to break away those requirements and put them into a separate sort of corner where you can actually customize, if you will, in this extension model without breaking the cloud SaaS model, but by providing that highly valuable customization, or configuration, whether that's for a specific vertical or micro vertical, or a geographical requirement, or some combination of the two. Now this really drives home that the idea that digital transformation has to become pervasive across organizations. And what I found, which I find really interesting, is that the very best transformations in companies are grassroots. They're not led by IT. They're led by real workers, real people in the field, on the shop floor, in the trenches, figuring out what needs to be done, and here's the key: either coding it themselves or being directly involved in an effort where the net new functionality is coming out of this collaboration between a developer and the real the actual employee whose job is on the line to get the functionality done. And this is where low code and citizen developer tools come in. We've seen some really great examples of projects that are truly transformative. They're at a small scale. This isn't transforming, Ubering the company overnight, but they do serious transformation, and it's led by these citizen developers. And they actually are there on the, from day one, helping to define the spec, helping to make sure the user experience is right. It ensures user uptake, which is absolutely essential in the change management of transformation, but it also really makes it clear that these tools are essential. You're going to need stuff like Power Apps to make that possible, because otherwise we're going to go, we can't do transformation at the cadence we need to do it by letting IT spend, several months in a classic kind of waterfall, let's get this done the old school way. We've got to be very, very quick and dynamic and get this stuff done. So these tools like Power Apps, I think, are essential. I think Microsoft's done a really good job, and I've seen some fabulous examples of Power Apps that really have been transformative and have been pretty easy to build.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think they've really found some great examples out in the field of people who just took it upon themselves at different organizations to sort of build something useful, hold it up and show it off to their manager or their CIO, and it has a wow factor and it solves a real problem, and they didn't have to. It might not be the end result. It might not be the end all. It might end up evolving further, but it actually is something that is tangible. It didn't require the IT department to file a ticket or hire a consultant or whatever. And there really is there does seem to be something powerful about that. Especially if it can, and this was my next point, especially if it can tie in and integrate data from existing systems, right? And that's the thing I keep thinking about is, has integration sure seems a lot easier when you have a bunch of cloud systems, especially if they're all from one vendor like Microsoft. But even if they're not, and they follow good API standards and good authentication protocols, integration sure seems like it becomes easier today.
It's built in. Yeah, it's built into the Power Apps model. I mean, they've got the common data store. There is this. Mm-hmm. There's this function that literally, is designed to vastly simplify the integration. In fact, to really sort of take it off the table, you're able to build, Power Apps using CDS without having to worry about what is the data format and where the heck is it. If it's there. In the palette, in your Power App development environment, there you go. You get to use it. I think that the other so it leverages data. I think the other advantage of the approach is that really you start to be able to bring lots of other technologies from the larger Microsoft offering into these environments. So, some of the stuff that we've seen now, and we started to see this at the Business App Summit. There are some fabulous use cases now for augmented reality. Obviously, HoloLens has been a leader on this. It's sort of been lingering in the background. We haven't heard that much about it, but this is a place where you start looking at how do you take what the larger Microsoft has and drive that into the enterprise and really make use of the fact that it's coming from the same company, the same product line. One of the things that struck me was that the HoloLens team now has someone sitting, whose function is within Dynamics. So suddenly that's been tightly integrated, whereas before it was often its own sort of skunk works. That means that that one of Microsoft's biggest advantages in the market can start to be leveraged into the Dynamics community, which is this broader palette of functionality, whether that comes out of the Azure world, whether it comes out of these new technologies like HoloLens, obviously the IoT and machine learning capabilities built into Azure are leverageable in these environments. And now you've really got an advantage for Microsoft customers and partners that is going to have a broad impact on Microsoft as a whole, a much broader impact than Dynamics used to have. Dynamics has always been this rather small little corner of a much bigger Microsoft, but now Dynamics can really be the proving ground and the showcase for what the greater Microsoft can provide to the enterprise.
It's interesting to hear that you see it as a lot of these positives too, and that's great. When you're talking to say vendors or even potentially a buyer in this space, are there areas that you kind of always land on that you consider low-hanging fruit that either companies should be making investments in today, or that vendors should be, let's say, pushing or trying to maximize for their customers that maybe they aren't today? Beyond what we've already touched on.
Well, we touched very briefly on implementations, and I think that's that to me is still one of the real problems in our market as a whole, and I think in particular in the cloud, is that there's still a lot of problem with having the right methodology, the right partner, and the right mindset to get these implementations done right. And we talked about the imperative to get them done right because it's a renewal business now. I think there's still some real low-hanging fruit needed, if you will, to be plucked. Maybe we need to grow the tree first, even to make sure that this implementation success is baked into the process. I find it interesting. One of the things that I sort of think is a unfortunate offshoot of the, how should we put it diplomatically, the changes in management and Dynamics and some of the back and forth that's been going on as to its positioning. There's this really cool tool, Lifecycle Services, LCS, which is a application lifecycle management tool, lives inside Azure. It's absolutely fabulous in terms of being able to do exactly what I was just talking about, make sure that these implementations go well and then post go live, the systems are running well. There's a lot of telemetry you can pull out of Azure like any cloud. Microsoft's had this product for a while. No one else has anything like it. They've sort of lost. I haven't heard LCS mentioned in ages. They're missing an opportunity to really strike a, kind of to take a stand and to say we are going to be the best in implementation. We're going to guarantee implementation success. People aren't doing that, and I think that's a real miss because we just can't go along in the old model of collecting revenue and making sure the earnings per share looks good to Wall Street and ignoring whether customers are actually implementing and being successful. And I think that's some low hanging fruit that's still really frankly get bothering me as I look at the market.
I certainly agree with you on lifecycle services. I think it has slowed. It's still there. When I talk to partners, though, it's still. I mean, I think if Microsoft were going to really plot an aggressive course forward, they would figure out where, customers and partners use it where they have to. And my take on it is that if they don't have to use it, they don't. And so finding those breakaway points and fixing them or filling them in with something either that keeps them in the solution or makes them want to keep using it, especially on the project management side, I think, or sort of like you said, methodology side, would be really great. I think when they lost some of the original visionaries of that tool, that sort of maybe slowed down the momentum a bit. They still do releases and they still do make updates, but it doesn't seem to be moving forward as fast as it could be.
Right, this is a missed opportunity. There's a big three-way race going on, obviously, between Amazon AWS, Azure, and now Google. I think the rest of the players I don't think are anywhere near as important. And what definitely the other two vendors in the space haven't really spent a lot of time on is the whole kind of meta management problem. If you're running multiple workloads in Azure of different products, you could, and you literally could be running an SAP instance and a Dynamics for Finance and Operations instance in Azure and pick three others. You as the customer really would like to have some management capability that sits on top of that lets you handle those workloads, differentiate them, understand the upgrade process. There's a whole sort of up leveling of the management of the cloud that no one is paying attention to. I think Azure has the best potential. Look for it. Right now, what we're seeing is this race to the bottom. Speeds, feeds, virtual machines. We're going to make this stuff so cheap. We'll pay you to use it, and that doesn't actually add strategic value to the customer. That's just making things cheap. And I think that they're missing that opportunity to add strategic value at this crucial lifecycle management function where really that's where the rubber hits the road. Nothing else matters if the product's not functioning optimally and it's not being implemented and used optimally. Nothing else matters in the cloud.
Well, that is interesting, and I would say that I certainly hear from both Microsoft and their partners that there is a lot of pressure to provide more in terms of application lifecycle management, sort of at the sort of cloud update type of level for the applications itself, and then to your point, I assume that the sort of the lower level, the hardware level, and the networking level is also key. I'd be really surprised if some of those other competitors aren't trying to reach that, but if they don't, I think Microsoft's in a good spot because they seem to be at least worried about it.
Yeah, well, SAP is looking at doing that finally. They understand that their future's in the cloud and they need to put some of these tools in the cloud. They get that. They have their own on-premise product, not necessarily their strongest product, but they know that lifecycle management needs that meta management capability. So, Microsoft's, it's another way in which there's, the changes, in Dynamics kind of left a few really important pieces missing in action or otherwise, lacking the kind of executive sponsorship that keeps them really flowing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And and I guess my only final thought on this, I'd still love to see it extend to the other D365 products as well. I think it's, with the right investment, they could all benefit from that kind of thing. But we'll see if that ever happens.
Oh yeah, and then to these other non-Microsoft workloads. I mean, you could really, Azure wants to be a powerhouse. They can provide that service because that's key. I mean, if I'm going to run these different products in Azure, I want a single pane of glass to really make sure they're well synchronized and working well together. That's big. That's a big deal for modern cloud-based IT.
Yeah, interesting stuff for sure. I mean, AppSource is nice, and I think it's sort of Microsoft sees it as table stakes for offering cloud solutions. But by the same token, something much more fully baked would be a whole other story.
Yep, agreed.
Okay, the last one I wanted to kind of ask you about was in terms of sort of trends that I see that I don't know how cyclical they are or sort of where you think we're at with them is when it comes to AI and process automation. It's something that I feel like I'm being hit with a lot in terms of sort of PR pitches and vendor updates. Not like Microsoft, but maybe their ISV partners, for example, with horizontal solutions and I suppose vertical. Is it something you're seeing a lot in terms of sort of point applications that use AI technology, machine learning, and maybe where do you think that segment of the market is at?
I see a lot of shall we say, nascent and early stage products and more beta than anything, but there's an interesting focus on using machine learning intelligence to really optimize some rather mundane and unimportant, or not unimportant, mundane and boring tasks, and really make it better for the humans who have to perform them to do a better job. And some of this comes, is very simple stuff. Classic invoice reconciliation that's a great one. I mean, do we really? We can use machine learning to do a lot of the grunt work, so that the final decision of is this right? Do we pay this invoice? Is it have we accounted for all the items? Is everything shipped? Are we getting the right price? Or is this do we actually have do we have the credit in the bank to do this? These questions, a machine learning approach can really take a lot of the hard drudgery work out of it. I think we still need to have the human in charge, and I think the ultimate decision is going to have to be made by a human, but we can make the human's job a lot easier. Supply chain is another area, and I've seen some really interesting technology, not from Microsoft per se, but from other vendors who are looking at supply chain and really driving intelligent supply chains, where again you start looking at where are the anomalies in my supply chain? Are they seasonal? Are they because this particular supplier just can't get it right in the spring because of something going on in their supply chain? Or are they due to a disaster, a tsunami, an earthquake? And how do we remediate them? There's a lot that you can do with machine learning and AI to again make that an easier decision ultimately for the human who's going to have to say, let's move this inventory over here, let's shift production over here, let's buy time with this customer by giving them something else, and et cetera, et cetera. So I like that world a lot, because it's not about, we're not saying the robot masters are going to take over the world and we'll just sit back and I don't know what we'll do with our lives when we don't have to work. I'm not planning on ever finding that out. But I think what it's really saying that we can take the machine out of the human. That's my favorite line about it.
And make the same three menus over and over all day on a screen. Right. Maybe they can stop doing that and do something better.
They can have a better job.
Yeah.
And frankly, they can have a better, they can also be more accurate and more functional.
I mean, and the thing that I'm really sort of wondering about is just how modular this can get. I mean, because I think the thing that has scared people for years is it was the idea of putting in some of these intelligent and capabilities it's a big project, it's a big science experiment, and can they really be done in a much more modular way? Is that the future?
Meaning repeatable and consumable, and not everything is a custom project that
right.
takes
and that they can be rolled out in a modular way, I guess, so right. that person's one job that was very, very repetitive, that can be replaced first, and then analysis of inventory needs in certain conditions that can be put in place 2 months from now, and down the line until you have several dozen of these things sort of taking care of these mundane things that people were doing before.
Honestly, Jason, I don't see any other way to do it. I think to try to do a big bang machine learning change would be way too disruptive and too hard to do, quite frankly. I think, in fact, there's so much. Look, the easiest problem not the easiest, the hardest problem, the easiest way to articulate this is to look at the hardest problem is just getting good data to train an algorithm. I mean, that alone is a challenge. We've seen some fascinating examples of bad data makes things really not work right. There's a really interesting woman I followed, a black woman, a developer who was working in facial recognition technology, and realized that the algorithms were being trained with facial recognition with faces that were mostly monochromatically white, and that this training data didn't represent the real world. She had a fascinating blog post about it and actually did a video on it. This is a real problem. If we don't have good training data, so we're starting with this. How do you even begin to do machine learning without great training data, and then moving forward into how do we make sure these are great algorithms, and then how do we apply them to real world situations, and how do we make sure they work? You've got multiple layers of success. We're only at the very beginning here, so there's no way we can big bang our way through this for a long time, if ever.
That's that's a great point, and I suspect we are going to start seeing more and more examples of how successful companies are. I think I know we'll be doing more coverage of this space ourselves, and I really do. I'm interested to see how successful some of the clients are, especially the early adopters who are sort of going in on this now with some eagerness to see where they find themselves, 18, 24 months down the line with their progress. Before the others follow along.
Yep. Well, we'll have lots of fun following this stuff. It's going to be one of the great revolutions of my career. Anyway, I'm looking forward to it, to be honest.
All right, awesome. Well, Josh, I know you have other pressing concerns here, so thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I always enjoy the podcast, and it's always great to have a discussion with another expert, Jason. To be honest.
All right, thanks again.
Okay.
This has been another episode of the MSDW Podcast. My thanks to Josh Greenbaum for joining me today. You can follow Josh on Twitter at JoshEAC or on his company site, where he writes some really fantastic articles. That's eaconsult.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.